Oh my God, we are back. It's the bi-weekly Q&A. Dr. James, Dr. Mike coming at you, here to answer question. Dr. Mike's karate chopping. How's it going, Mike?
Jamaican air horn. Good. James, I have something to tell you that I just talked about in a YouTube video that won't be released for probably half a year.
Oh my God.
I have co-opted my wife, Crystal, into rewatching the Lord of the Rings trilogy with me.
The extended edition or the regular?
We are doing the regular.
Okay. All right.
Not a lot of kudos to her, but she doesn't know. So she's real new to the shit. Now, she says she's seen it before, but then shit will happen in the plot where she's like, is that guy going to die? And I'm like,
you haven't seen it. Get out of here.
That's Frodo, girl. I think he dies. But in any case, I got to rewatch the original One Does Not Simply Walk into Mordor.
Oh,
and I was like, wow, that's where the meme is from.
Did you get up and were like, oh, he did it. He did it.
It was
Crystal.
satisfying. It was satisfying to see.
Oh man, I can't unsee Sam from his SVU appearance where he was like the creepy like Boy Scout camp leader or whatever.
I can. I don't have to. He is a creep. I hate Sam. I fucking hate him. It's like, you're just dead weight, you fucking asshole. You had a chance to kill, what's his name, Smeagol, and you didn't do it, like a little bitch. Oh, by the way, while I'm at it, what was his name? The One Does Not Simply guy? He had a name, didn't he?
Boromir.
Yo, if I was on that squad, Sean
what's his pen? Yeah.
If I was on that squad and Boromir started his old bullshit, like the first time, I'd be like, this shit ends right now. You're going to nut up. We're going to get the shit done, or get the fuck off our crew. Talk about temptation. I should be with the one with the ring. I'm going to put that ring somewhere. You're going to technically own it. You're not going to want it where I put it, motherfucker.
Dude, totally. I hate to be this guy, but I'm going to go there for just a minute. If you read the books, what's really funny about Boromir is like half of the first book, they just talk about how fucking strong he is. Like they're just, a lot of the book is just like them walking and not much is happening. They're just kind of describing the scene. And so much of it is like, oh, Boromir, so fucking strong. He could throw those fucking little bitch ass hobbits over the mountain if he wanted to. There's a part where they're like trekking through the snow and he's like, Boromir like chopped the snow with his sword because he's so fucking awesome. And they really do like embellish about how awesome and badass he is in the book. It's really funny.
And then he just takes a fucking dive.
If you are into some of those characters, it actually is worth reading the books at some point because it's just different enough where and like kind of quirky enough where it's kind of funny.
Dude, if full immersion VR ever is a thing and it's like super intelligent so we can put in any scenario ever, I'm for sure like getting me and you as like contractors to like help Frodo get the ring across. And we just join the crew. I just want to, we get DBZ powers in this, by the way. I know it's not fair, but so I just want to be like, let me see the ring. He's like, oh, he gives me the ring. I'm like, I disappeared and I saw a big red eye. He's like, I'm like, this ring sucks. You can have it. I don't want it. The fuck? This is like a ring of power. I'm like, do I get special powers? No, I'm just invisible. And this fucking asshole just keep watching me and talking shit in some kind of demonic language. Like,
or you like put the ring on and you're like, I see a big red eye. And you're like, yeah. And you're like, just blow the shit out of it.
So sweet in a distance shot. They're like, did we do it? And like the ring like fades away and loses all its power. Like, I guess you can keep it now. They're like, wow, that shortened the movie.
I'm going to sell this at a thrift store.
The former Lord of the Rings ring. They're like, current. They're like, no, it doesn't have any more powers. Ah, shit. Here's 5 cents.
This is a fake. This is fake.
Yeah. All right. I'm ready.
I'm sure whoever does our timestamps, I forgot his name at the moment.
Milo.
Hates
us.
Like,
he hates
this.
us.
This is some bullshit.
Yeah, like, what do we even title this thing?
Here we go. We had more than a few questions with quite a bit of upvotes this week. So very good. Our loyal fan base, very good with the upvotes this week.
Yes, I kind of remember which ones they were. So let's just go from the top to bottom, and I'll let you know if it doesn't register. So definitely Trevor Trev is first.
Trevor Trev.
James, this one's all you. I'll read it. You answer it. Trevor Trev asks, what is the most effective and reliable way to build tendon and other connective tissue strength and or durability?
Yeah, great question. So one of the first and most, so I'm going to say this and then kind of give it some caveats. So the first and most obvious way of improving the strength of connective tissues like tendons, ligaments, bone, et cetera, is by putting them under stress and tension. So by far, the biggest stimulator is tension. Now, there are limitations as to how you apply that tension stress, right? Because you could easily just say like, okay, I want to build stronger tendons. Let me load up 200% of my 1RM and see if I can unrack this bar. Really bad idea, right? So kind of the best way of going about presenting a tension stimulus is by implementing repeated tension stimuli in a sustainable way. And it just so happens that hypertrophy training works really good. Now, if we were to say, what is better in terms of improving tendon and ligaments, and we'll say bone strength, strength training versus hypertrophy training, you would have to give the nod to strength training. However, strength training also comes with a greater risk of injuring those tissues because the amount of load that you use is more overloading in that sense. Whereas hypertrophy training typically uses loads that don't really put those kind of tissues at a very significant risk of injury and therefore may not strengthen them as rapidly. But in the long term, I would say hypertrophy training turns out is just a coincidentally really, really effective way of improving the strength of those. And if you are on that Team Full ROM subscription, training them not only with tension, but also training them under very, very large ranges of motion actually improves what I would call their mobility characteristics, meaning not only their ability to tolerate tension, but ability to tolerate tension from the terminal ranges of motion. I mean, doesn't get much better than hypertrophy training in that regard. So there's definitely other ways. If you wanted to look at bone specifically, impacts are actually a very good way of strengthening bone tissue. But
again, trade-off, yeah.
Trade-offs comes with a lot of risk. So turns out just like good old meat and potatoes hypertrophy training is probably a sweet middle ground of like both improving tendon, ligament strength, bone strength without presenting a huge risk of injury as well. Mike, how did I do?
Beautiful, phenomenal, better than I would have. I will say that, so people typically think, limit strength, sets of 1 to 3. But it's funny because sets of 1 to 3, you start experiencing connective tissue sort of pain and weakness issues. What they tell you to do in the literature is to do like sets of 10 to make them stronger. And there's at least one study that directly sort of examined this and alternating lower load, higher rep phases in order to build connective tissue strength. So yes, linear thinking would say, okay, the heavier it is, the better. But the stimulus to fatigue ratio wise, especially sustainability wise, it seems like hypertrophy training actually does a really, really good job of that.
And you could maybe make a caveat and say like metabolite training is probably the least conducive for that type of goal. Whereas like
under 15 reps is probably.
Yeah, under 15 reps. There you go.
5 to 15 reps and you're probably fucking gold.
Yeah. Good question.
Yep. Next up is Forrest Nash Fitness. We didn't hit show less because we don't want to read his whole question. I'm totally kidding.
Looks
I like the show less.
Pretty handsome in the avatar.
Forrest Nash. Hello. He's actually my name is Forrest Fitness and Nash is a nickname.
Yeah, he has like a huge neck beard in real life. Gross.
Hey guys, I slightly doctored the photograph. Just kidding, Forrest. We love you. Hi, docs. Lately, I've been considering going back to school part-time to do a bachelor's degree in training nutrition related field. I feel like I already have a pretty solid grasp of the applied principles of training nutrition thanks in large part to the content you guys put on RP. Aw, thank you. I would love to gain a deeper understanding of the underlying mechanics of nutrition and human physiology, how they interact with the body and respond to training stimuli, etc. I work as an online coach, and I'm not planning to change careers as I find it pretty fulfilling. So this would be mainly to further my own depth of knowledge and become more of an expert in my field. I was just wondering if you guys could share any advice as to what type of degree might be best fit for what I'm after. Nutrition, physiology, sports, exercise science, etc., or what to look for in a good academic program. Many thanks for your help, as always. Awesome question for us. Thanks for asking. James, I'm going to go ahead and hang myself on this one. This is the battle in which I die. I think that in the modern economy, in the exercise and sport training fields, outside of an attempt to become ultra high level specific expert, super brainiac, mega fucking nerd who knows as much as possible, and or most importantly, someone who is choosing to have credentials in order to bolster their business or just for their ego. You're tired of people not calling you doctor when you go to the airport and shit like that. I don't think there's a compelling reason in this field to get a formal education. And I think that you can simply go to the library, get some books on sport science, training, physiology, nutrition, work through the textbooks, work through the problem sets, read everything, practice, practice, practice. And after 2 months or 4 months or 6 months spent on every textbook for about a year straight, you'll know more than almost everyone who's gotten an undergrad in the shit. Another thing you can do is find out what the books are in the graduate classes or undergrads that they're using and just read the books yourself. And maybe sometimes you can buy the books on the market and they come with like sort of web links for video instruction and all this other stuff. You just work through it yourself. I would say some certs are very good. They teach you stuff, but it seems like you know what you're doing at an applied level already. A cert's probably not exactly up your alley. So I would just do reading, start with textbooks and branch out to articles and reviews that you're interested about further from the textbooks. I'd say that's probably your best bet, unless you actually want a degree for that stamp. James and I both have a bunch of them, but I don't know if it's exactly worth it. If you're new and you're 18 years old and you don't know what you want to do and you maybe want to do fitness, yeah, getting an undergrad may be a good idea. But if you're already successful coach, it sounds like you are, man, just on price alone, shit is a tough fucking sell. And you may be quite disappointed with what you're getting. James?
I think you nailed it. I wasn't sure which direction you were going to go. And I was worried that I was going to sound like the crazy tinfoil hat, but you beat me to it. So I was actually going to say that my opinion on this has been kind of changing. And maybe if you guys have been listening for a while, you might've caught wind of this a little bit, but I personally think at the current time, academia is kind of going into the toilet. And I know that makes me sound like a tinfoil hat person, and I recognize that. But what
not
is
to
true,
other tinfoil hat people.
For sure. What is true is that prices have gone up exponentially. Bureaucracy at the university has gone up exponentially, and the quality of education has been going down over time.
Or flatlined at best. Yeah.
So what I have been hesitantly telling people is that unfortunately the universities and just academia in general is no longer kind of serving the purpose that it used to. Right now, it seems to just be like a mill for allowing people to get, credentials with very low, what's the word? They're just becoming degree mills in which people who are largely unqualified are able to get a degree, and they're less about like introducing people to the great thinkers and more about just teaching ideologies in which you are supposed to fall in line. Yikes. So I actually kind of tend to agree with Mike here, maybe for the same and slightly different reasons, in that I just don't feel like people are getting the bang for their buck that they used to at the university. And it's pretty hard, as Mike said, it's a pretty big price point to swallow, to walk away and say like, this is all shit I could have just figured out from reading on my own. Pro tip, so I can get off this crazy tinfoil hat spot. One thing that I did, and this is to kind of go back to Mike's point about figuring out which textbooks they use in the classroom. This is just a pro tip from me. When I was applying for jobs and I had to do a couple lectures, guest lectures as part of my job application for academia, what I would do is look up the course catalog of the university, which is you can usually do for free and you don't have to have a login or anything. You look up the course catalog, find the relevant courses, and they will always have a book listed as part of the course. So you can literally look up like advanced nutrition at this university or advanced, exercise physiology 2 at this university. Find the course, look it up in the catalog, find the book, read the book. Boom, there you go. I think that what you don't get from the university, you have to get in the fields anyway. You have to get that kind of, there's an intersection of like kind of knowledge and experience that you have to kind of meld together to become a good coach. And you're already a coach, so you probably already know this, but it's at the same point, it's like, okay, what facts don't you know? Find those in books and in papers and then synthesize it with what you already know. And then that's how you become a better coach.
We're actually writing a similar idea down that we implement for later.
In the book that I'm working on, I kind of like go on a really big tangent about like what it means to do evidence-based practice. And that book is unfortunately on hold because we have a very big, cool project in the works that I can't talk about. And if you take a hint, it's enough to delay a book from the one and only James Hoffman. So it must be pretty important.
I can't hold the news anymore. I'll tell you what we're working on.
No,
it's an RP robot. It's an RP robot. It has a gun, and it comes up to people in the street. He goes, "Are you following a fitness lifestyle?" And you're like, "No." He's like, "Beep, beep, 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 beep," and it just blows people up. We're gonna get your motherfuckers fit one way or another.
I was worried you were gonna do it.
Unreal, James. I would have really off my rocker. You'd have to send the robot after me then.
Exactly.
Are you Dr. Mike Israetel? Yes.
Who's also in the shape of a squid.
That would be fucking sweet. God damn, that's an engineer.
Kraken RP robot.
I don't want any other kind of robot now that you mention it. Jay Big was cool, wasn't he? But Jay Little is even cooler.
Is there a Big J and a Jay Little?
Hey, Little J. He's like, it's Jay Little, not Little J. Like, yeah, whatever. Fuck the fuck.
What about BMI J?
Ooh. Technically I'm big, but I'm not fat. Like, okay, Jay. All right.
This episode is good. Everyone's going to be like, this episode sucks. Thumbs down.
You guys are mean. Fuck you.
Idiots.
Actually, I had a lot of shit in the comments for like, I think I mentioned what my tattoos meant. Look, people asked me and they're like, really, Ayn Rand, you're an idiot. And you cringe. And I'm like, man, people, God damn. Motherfucker can't even get his breathing right back here. These
I know.
on me.
It's usually most of our episodes only have like 4 thumbs down. When we get into like our personal stuff, it goes up to like 11 because people are like, oh, God damn it.
Don't worry.
Ayn Rand, guns, fuck.
Yeah. You're a bad person with bad thoughts. Jay Little is a good person with good thoughts, and he asks, hi, docs. We know that lack of sleep interferes with gains, but could you put numbers to how much it interferes? For example, if I have one night a week during which I only sleep 5 hours, do I lose something like 10% of my gains or something like 50%? What about 2 nights a week? Well, we can actually answer that question pretty likely that it's not 50%. Could that fucking be awful, 50%? Dude. What about 2 nights a week? Also, if I do have a bad night of sleep, what are some good ways to drop fatigue except for recovery training? How much would it help to add more calories or just rest more on that day? Thank you for your work. Awesome channel. Well, thanks so much for asking, Jay. Apologies for the little jab jokes at the expense of your actually quite normal name. I'll take a crack at this one, James, and you can play cleanup for me because you're the expert here. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
So to your example, one night, so the overarching theme is it's incremental and it's cumulative, which means one night's not that big of a deal. It may be like if you could have gained a pound of muscle that week, you only have 5 hours sleep versus 8, maybe you'll gain 9.5 pounds of muscle. Like it's just really not, 0.95 pounds. Like, holy shit. You mean like 950% more muscle by not sleeping? Yeah, 0.95 pounds. Like it's nominal, right? Nominal.
What program are they on?
That's right. So it's something like 10%, nothing like 50%. 2 nights a week, and maybe it bumps to 15%, something like that. So if you don't get sleep all week enough, then yeah, it's probably like 50%, right? So there's that. And then if you do have a bad night of sleep, what are some good ways to drop fatigue? James will answer that. But you say, how much would it help to add more calories? The problem with more calories is if you don't get enough sleep the night before, adding calories generally creates a higher degree of adiposity than normal. So there's more of those calories that go to fat. That's probably not something you want. I would say it just says, you said rest more on that day. I would say try to go to bed earlier that day to really make sure you get like 9 hours of sleep the next day. And that's really the way to wipe the slate clean. James?
Yeah, you nailed it, right? So I understand where you're going with the question, Jay, but the big thing we have to preface is like there's nothing you can do to work around not getting enough sleep. Like you can't eat your way out of poor sleep. You can't like methamphetamine your way out of poor sleep in the long run. In the short term, sure, but in the long term, it's going to catch up with you. So yeah, a couple things here. So the question of like, how much gains do you lose? It's hard to put a number on that, but really what you're kind of in hypertrophy training, what you're looking at is like, how much of sleep disruptions can account for losses in actual like transcription, translation effects of protein synthesis in the muscles that you trained. It's very difficult to put a number on that, but it's, I would say, as Mike said, notable in like a cumulative sense, hard to say in an acute sense. If we were to look at something else like motor skill development, that is something that actually sleep has a profound effect on. Mm-hmm. So in hypertrophy training, we're not super concerned with like motor skills because we tend to keep movements in for a long time. They get ingrained over time. Most people don't forget how to bench press overnight, something like that. But in like a performance,
like lay down to bench, you're like,
what is this?
No.
Yeah. But what my point being here is that they have looked at sleep and motor learning, and they have found that sleep has a profound effect on potentiating motor learning. And there seems to be almost an all or nothing effect with sleep and motor learning, meaning like if you were working on some kind of skills, it could be something simple like learning how to play a piece on the piano or doing sporting stuff. And if your sleep gets significantly disrupted that night, kind of the efforts that you put into that motor skill just don't manifest the way that they normally would. Whereas if you, classic example, if anybody's ever played an instrument like a guitar or piano or something, and you're working on something and you're just having a really hard time with it, and you're like, I can't get a good night's rest. The next day you come back to it and you're like, you just crush, face melting, right? You're like, that was nothing to me. I'm a fucking god. It's because a lot of that gets consolidated when you're sleeping, right? So the question is like, kind of where is the intersection of like, we know that hypertrophy is going to be more of a, cellular mediated effect, meaning things like the signaling pathways are going to dictate whether or not you actually grow muscle or not. But we also know that there's like a neuromuscular component in your ability to generate big overloads through like smooth, efficient, forceful movements. That gets affected by sleep significantly. Somewhere in the middle is probably where sleep disruptions affect things like hypertrophy. Like you're not able to train as effectively as you could be, and you're not getting as much recovery and adaptation as you could be. Something along those lines. So I'm not sure. We do know that like not getting enough sleep is bad. And to kind of get to the latter part of your question, you can't like eat your way out of it. So the ultimate answer is sleep more if you want to be at your best. And if you can't do that, just know that you won't be at your best and kind of just do the best that you can given the circumstances that you're in.
Awesome, James. Thank you so much. Jay, if you want to Google Menno Henselman's sleep gains, you'll get a lot of really good things because Menno has actually shared some studies in which they put numbers on some of the stuff. They're not general numbers, but for the specific study design preview, it's significant for muscle and fat. So interesting.
And like, yeah, sorry, I had another thought as you were saying that. Menno's great, by the way. And whenever Mike and I are like not sure about something, we're always like, let's see what Menno has to say about this, because he's usually pretty reasonable. With sleep, you kind of have the 1-2 punch of like you have cellular interference effects where you just don't get enough sleep and that kind of dampens some of the recovery adaptive processes. But then you have indirect effects where you're just fucking tired and now you can't train as hard, right? So like long term, that's a 1-2 punch of not growing muscle, like not recovering and just not able to perform or do overload training. You can see where that's going.
Yeah, 100%. Next up, a very quick question from John, 316, JK.
Ooh, religious.
He says, regarding rest times, is 225 for 987 with longer rest times any different from 225, 965 or shorter rest times if proximity to failure is the same? I did a James on that one. As long as the shorter rest times hits the 4-factor checklist for rest, the results are going to be very difficult to parse in any meaningful sense. So roughly identical. You're no longer limited cardiovascularly before you start your next set. You're no longer limited neurologically. You feel strong again. No other muscles are limiting the movement, like you're trying to hit quads with squat, but your lower back is still fried. You didn't rest long enough. And the muscle can hit at least 5 good hard reps again. Then, gee whiz, that you're probably good to go. I wouldn't rest much longer than that. You can rest longer. Maybe you'll get some kind of benefit, but maybe you won't. So that's my best answer, James.
That's an excellent answer. Am I splitting hairs here? So preface that, but the only time I would say there might be a potential benefit to the longer rest is for people who are in strength and power sports and you're doing like hypertrophy to potentiate gains in strength and power. And in that case, like if you take longer rests and you're doing 987, but those 987s are like, boom, really explosive, really forceful every time. That's at least, I don't want to say a significant, but a tangible advantage in transfer of training into your sporting activities. Whereas like if you're doing the other, like the 965 and they're just kind of slow and normal, I won't say slow, but like normal pace training, maybe that's not as good as like taking a longer rest and having a little more pep in your step. But for hypertrophy training, I think what Dr. Mike said was exactly correct.
Yeah, great answer. Next up is Tomer, one of our regulars.
Yeah, oops, I undid it. There we go.
Yeah, shut up, Tomer. We're going to answer a third of your question. How important is it as an intermediate to focus only on the big muscles and not the small ones? traps, calves, forearms, abs. I train 4 times a week, upper, lower, and don't know if I should focus on taking all the big muscles, MEV, MRV, or try to add some sets to small muscle groups. My goal is max hypertrophy. I'm guessing the answer would be to train from MEV to MRV as much muscle as I can, but why? Why is all the way to MRV for some muscles at a time more hypertrophy than all muscles, MEV to MAV-ish? Plus, do bigger muscle groups so let's answer that one first. So the technical answer lies in our book, How Much Should I Train, that James and I co-authored a few years back. So Tamara picked that book up, and it has a real in-depth answer. It's a theoretical answer, so maybe you can get all the same gains going MEV to MAV-ish, but already, based on the way you said it, the problem can be conceptualized a little bit more sharply. There is no such thing as MAV as a standard set in stone variable. MEV and MRV themselves are finicky, but MAV is a floating variable that is lower when you start a program and drifts up as you get accumulated to more volume and need more to get your optimal progress. It's like saying, what's the optimal amount of French language exposure do I need to get better at French? Well, the first week of French, like 5 words. The second week of French, 10 words. The 15th week of French, you need motherfuckers to have whole conversations with you. The MRV is whatever tilts you over. MEV is whatever doesn't help you learn French at all. But MAV, even over the course of weeks, changes. So what you think you really mean to say is MEV to halfway to MRV typically, which is fine. And maybe that results in quite good gains. The thing is, especially as you get more intermediate and more advanced, there is some decent theoretical reason to at least open our minds to the possibility that some of the best gains, maybe not all, lie between midway through MEV to MRV, which we'll call pretend MAV or average MAV, to MRV. It's that pushing. Now, what is the precedent for that idea? Well, let's just look at working sets. It's been pretty clear that the most hypertrophic reps are probably the last 5. That doesn't mean the first ones aren't hypertrophic. Oh, they are. But gee whiz, if you never push it close to failure, man, most of the research says that you're probably going to be lacking. Does that mean you have to push to fail all the time? No. But just the same way, you also could just not know your MRVs and you think you're midway, but you're like fucking light years away from them. So you're just piddle paddling with easy training all the time. So in order to make sure that, and there's all the other theoretical problems or practical problems that result. How do you know when you've hit midway through? How do you know you're not doing enough? Like if your progress hasn't stalled, how do you know another week of adding more intensity and volume won't cause even more progress or continued progress? So yeah, you probably get great results, but if you're really serious about getting your best results, most of the time taking most muscles from MEV to MRV is probably a good idea. Here's another contention to that, another point. If you have a situation in which your total body MRV starts to be a sum that is less than all the muscles added together, you actually can't, you have to cut some muscles short. And then those shortcut muscles, maybe that shortcut is still good enough. You train a few sets above MEV and maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't work all that well. But another thing is it's so easy to maintain muscles that you're better off putting some on maintenance and pushing the rest MEV to MRV, and then just switching gears later. That also boosts your training efficacy as far as psychology. It's more fun. You get more variation. You really get to grind on something and then put it on the back burner. From all of those perspectives and many more described in the book, it just makes a little bit more sense to prioritize and do what you do. Now, can you do it the way you're describing? For sure. It'll probably work really well. But if we're going to give you our best advice, we would say it's not overly important to focus on the big muscles and not the small ones in your example, but it probably pays off. Now, that answers the MEV MRV question. The big muscles versus small ones, a lot of that is 2 things. One, if your goal is max hypertrophy, is it goal max hypertrophy like for the next year, or is it goal max hypertrophy for a lifetime? Because lifetime, and we've spoken about this at length before and address it, I think, in the book as well, the big muscle groups are prone to injury because they generate such high forces. You want to build them nice and early when you're young and healthy and have no injury history. Bringing up your back when you're all fucked up is hard. Bringing up your side delts when you're all fucked up, I mean, for the love of God, if you can't train your side delts, you really just should retire from training altogether. Smaller muscle groups are easier to bring up later, which is why we prefer to work on the bigger ones first, 9 times out of 10. That doesn't mean all the time, but that's kind of the thing. Now, if you want a balanced physique at all times, you can work on everything, but we would prefer you prioritize it. If you just want to do sort of MEV MEV plus all the time, that's totally cool. Probably get you great gains, but if we were your coaches, we probably would try to dissuade you. And then he also asks, do bigger muscle groups have more potential to grow, and why? Probably not relative to their initial sizes. It's relatively probably the same. Also, while cutting, is it worth to train them all? Yes, because muscles you don't train during cutting, at least at maintenance, will start to recede. And then he says, I'm sorry for the long question. You should apologize. How dare you ask questions on a distinctly question asking YouTube video? Thank you very much. This channel and you helps me more than you can imagine. Well, I don't have a very good imagination, so that's easy. James, what did I miss?
Yeah, that was very thorough and excellent answer. The only other thing that I'll mention is for beginners and intermediates, training the big muscle groups just coincidentally also trains a lot of those small muscle groups indirectly. So it ends up being a very efficient way to train. Now, if you're just doing like chest flies and knee extensions, then that wouldn't be true. But most people as beginners and intermediates mostly are going to be, at least per our recommendations, would be focusing on our compound kind of barbell or multi-joint, multi-muscle group movements, even for something like quads, right? So for a beginner and intermediate, what's going to be your kind of biggest bang for your buck for quads? It's going to be something like a high bar squat, a hack squat, and or a leg press, something like that. Well, it turns out that actually grows your hamstrings a little bit, grows your glutes a little bit, grows your calves a little bit. Same thing with like pull-ups, pull-downs, bench presses. That's going to hit your forearms. It's going to hit your biceps. It's going to hit your triceps. It's going to hit your front delts. So it turns out that like focusing on those big muscle groups and taking those as a priority to MRV for a very long part of your training age covers a lot of those little muscle groups, or at least brings them up notably anyway. And then as you become more advanced, if you notice that they are lagging, maybe you haven't done enough biceps or enough forearms or enough calves, they're very, very easy to bring up because you haven't been doing all that much direct training. So they're still pretty sensitive to training stimuli, and they come up really fast, as Dr. Mike already said. So it's a very efficient way to train throughout your training age.
Boom. Next up is Ryan Markoff.
Got it.
Ryan, Google Markoff modeling. It'll be fun. Hey, docs, how would you recommend increasing squat mobility? I want to get on the full ROM train, but I don't have a ticket yet. My squat depth is likely limited by hips and low back tightness from years of blow job, BJJ guard playing. Is it better to just warm up everything and try to keep going deeper, or have dedicated training time to do static dynamic mobility training? Thanks. James, I think this is a bit more up your alley than mine, so I guess I'll play clean up this time.
Yeah, so like a lot of people are really into doing the static and dynamic mobility training. There is definitely a place for that. I don't want to come off out the gate and say like, don't do that. That's dumb, right? So if we're talking about squat mobility, Mike, I want to get your insight on this. I can understand people thinking that hip and back is a limiting factor. I would say, I'm just going to throw out a rough estimate. I would say 4 out of 5 times, 80% of the time, it's usually calves. Calves are what really can prevent ankle mobility from getting into that really, really high bar squat position, the good high bar squat position. It's one of those things where people are like, oh, I'm so tight, I can't squat. And you just go like, put some plates under your heels and watch this. And then they go, boom, perfect, weightlifter, high bar squat. And you're like, yeah, dude, that was it. So that's where having something like weightlifting shoes or elevating your heels can help quite a bit. So I'm not trying to say that you're wrong. I would just say that in my experience, it's usually the ankle mobility that gets people on that full ROM train, gets them the ticket on the full ROM train. Tightness in the lower back and hips can actually help you like stay in a better position on the high bar squat in some cases.
Yeah.
Right. So that being said, the way that you actually improve mobility is first and foremost by practicing your technique. That is number one. That comes first. So whenever you are doing squats or you're training legs, you're always trying to get the best range of motion that you can within the technique constrictions that you are applying. So you might, in the example of a high bar squat, don't take this out of context and said, Dr. James said to do this, but just as an example, you might find that
Dr. James said,
Yeah, you might find that like you can squat with what you think is really great technique down to about parallel, and then at parallel you start to see like your weight shifts forward onto your tippy toes, and you start getting some butt wink, right? So you might say, okay, that's kind of like where my technique really starts to break down. So your goal is to use a moderate weight, not a heavy weight, not a light weight, but use kind of a moderate weight, maybe something like 10 to 15 repetition range that you can do as far down as you can before your technique really, really starts to break down. So you want to get as much range as you can under load while using good technique. So that is first and foremost, like practice using moderate loads with the best technique that you can, and slowly and steadily try to increase your range of motion over time. That is number one, can't get around it. After that, you can work on some additional things like some calf stretching, some hamstring stretching, things like that. That's going to pay dividends in the long term, but it's not going to make a really, really tangible effect in the short term. In the short term, what you have to do is just get incrementally more and more comfortable into that deep squat position. One thing that Mike and I have used in the past, and I think would continue to recommend to this day, are pause squats. Pause squats are a really, really excellent way of just here's the great thing about pause squats. It forces you to do it correctly with good technique in the actual full depth, or at least as far as you can go. And because it's paused, you can't use heavy weights, you motherfucker. You got to use some light ass weights and get that technique down. So
sit at the bottom of the pause and try to make it a little deeper for like 2 or 3 seconds, and then come up, and then get down, and then let it sink, and then come up.
What's the squat variation where you use the safety bar and you have the hand holds? You know what I mean?
Yeah, the Hatfield squat, I think.
Hatfield squat. So what you can, and this is a great one if you have a safety bar, is you do the Hatfield style squat in a paused, like controlled way. You go down as far as you can before you feel like your technique is breaking down. And if you can't go down all the way, it's okay. You got that like Hatfield position, so you're nice and stable, and you'll come back up. That's an awesome one to try and train pause squats down all the way while still feeling really secure and stable. So I feel like I'm rambling on this question too much, but long story short is use moderate loads, work on the technique. Don't think that doing a lot of stretching or like peeing dog, bird dog, whatever, like swinging your hips around is going to make a huge difference. In the long term, it will help slowly over time. But the way that you improve range of motion in the short and moderate and long term is by stretch under load and doing it in the most ecologically valid context possible, which is in this case, the movement that you're trying to actually improve upon, which is the squat.
Super. All right. Next up, it's actually somebody way out of the screen.
Oh, no.
I have to go to the search function.
Control F.
Henrik Anderson.
Oh.
Henrik is a fucking superstar of just getting upvoted like crazy.
Okay.
People love him.
Wait, is it this one, supinated?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Correct. Henrik asks, are supinated grip curls all you need? Or would you recommend including some neutral pronated grip curls? Neutral grip curls like this?
Like a hammer curl?
No. I think he meant, supinated grip curls for biceps. Okay, got it. I thought he meant curls for the grip.
So he's wondering like maybe hammer style or reverse style?
Or reverse style. I personally do supinated curls because I don't see how brachioradialis could be a weak point. When I hear get that brachioradialis real big, I usually think it's something the so-called influencers say to get the views. Probably true. Is there any point in doing anything else other than supinated curls? So here's the thing. 2 things. We'll just take one at a time. On what are called reverse curls, or basically pronated grip curls, the limiting factor is typically your thumb strength, which is dick. So unless you get some kind of like setup where you have a Versa grip, it's probably a fucking waste of your time. Secondarily to that, they work on some cool muscles right here. But if you do like face pulls and stuff and other shoulder stuff, it actually gets hit a lot during that. In addition to that, and this is something I'm pretty, my position may, I don't know if it surprised anyone. It's a different view than many people have. I think hammer curls are not always, but often a giant waste of time. Because think about like the way you do every pulling variation almost, it's in that position. So the muscles involved, there are a few, radialis, brachioradialis, etc. There are a few muscles in there that are so fucking highly taxed in every fucking pulling thing you do. And then you realize, okay, what pulling am I generally not doing? And the answer is underhand pulling. And most, you have some, but most pulling's not. It's either neutral or neutral just facing this way. And then at that point, it's like, man, I guess really, those muscles get zapped all the time. And I think that outside of trying some hammer curls and seeing if you can see a real noticeable visual change in 6 months, mostly you just need to do supinated curls because you probably just want bigger biceps, and the other muscles of the forearm and the upper arm are probably hit pretty well to just back work and shoulder work. That's my thoughts, James.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, this is one of those kind of like individualization type problems where, like, so Mike and I are probably different. Whereas I feel like hammer curls and reverse curls are ones that I actually benefit from, but that's likely a product of like our anthropometric differences, like we have in many different exercises. But that being said, I totally agree with Mike. The majority of your bicep training should almost exclusively be supinated curls, because that's going to have the best SFR for the bicep specifically, and then everything else is covered by the pulling movements you do. That being said, if you do have like a bicep emphasized day, let's say you were doing a specialization program or something along those lines where biceps was really kind of the focal point of that day, and maybe you had 2 or 3 exercises, what I have found is that you can include things like hammer curls or reverse curls after you have done something that is in a supinated curl form. So you can almost kind of treat it like a pre-fatigue. And as Mike said, like if you do like easy bar reverse curls, it's a grip exercise for people who are fresh, right? But if you pre-fatigue it a little bit and you have a reasonable grip strength, or you're using something like a Versa grip, you can act, and some people, like myself included, and I have like Stretch Armstrong arms, can actually hit all of those MEV ghetto indicators using that exercise. Now, I think that's more of an exception than a rule. So if you are somebody who is long and lanky like me, you might actually find those to be useful. But I think most, if not all of your bicep training should be in that supinated form. It's hard to argue against. Like,
yeah,
in all aspects, it's like, you're going to tell me that like reverse curls or hammer curls are really going to present a better stimulus in terms of like tension, range of motion. And also, like, if you guys have ever done hammer curls as part of a block, you can only do hammer curls so long before your forearms are like, fuck this.
Well, also your fucking rowing and vertical pulling movements start to be like, oh my God, like this is too much. I will say at the end of the day, I think James and I have tried so much shit diligently when we were younger that we can at least see we saw a lot of other people try it. It just never worked. Guys, I've seen people hammer curl and tear the blue in the face. I ain't never seen a motherfucker that was like, man, you see people squat and then they have much bigger legs. And that makes sense. Hammer curls, man, it's just not doing it. Or reverse curls, like, yeah, you get some cool shit out of them, but they're not going to magically change your arms to be much bigger. It's just not a thing.
Yeah, it's certainly not as a primary movement, right? It's like maybe if you have some extra bicep sets in the tank, okay, I can see that, but not as like, okay, let me get warmed up and hit these reverse curls right off the bat. No way, come on.
Yeah, 100%. All right, next up is Julie Menken.
Julie, let's see.
All right. A female on our channel. Julie asks, hi, docs. Why do I feel my triceps more than lats in a straight arm pull downs? Am I doing something wrong? Is there something I can do to improve the movement mind muscle connection? So the long head of your triceps is highly involved in that exercise. No big deal. That's great. You can play around with your hand position. Some people like wider and narrower, and they feel the lats more and triceps less. And you can play around with completely locked elbows or soft elbows and see which one works best. And you can also play around with if your hands are like this, if your hands are like this, or if you have the rope dildo things, or even if you have an attachment that looks like that, and see which one of those seems to hit your lats more and your triceps less. And some of those correct answers could be where you find your best SFRs for the lats, but I would say don't worry about your triceps. They'll be getting bigger and all will be well anyway. Yeah.
Nailed it. Mike, this is like an interesting individualization question too. So I'll tell you how I prefer to do it. And then I'm curious because we're built so differently. So I'm wondering if we have overlap or if we're different. So for me, I have to go narrow and like hard lockout in order for triceps not to be limiting. What about for you?
Hilariously, almost the opposite. Wider and with soft elbows, and I feel my lats a shitload.
That's so interesting. For those of you who probably haven't gathered yet, Mike and I are as polar opposite builds as it gets. Mike's a little bit more short and stocky. I'm like long and lanky. So there you go. So if you're more like me, maybe try hard elbows, narrow. And if you're more like Mike, maybe go soft elbows a little bit wider. And if you're somewhere in the middle, maybe somewhere in the middle between those recommendations.
Yeah. That's it. All right. Next up. Oh, hold up. Well, let's go to the guy right below there.
Michael Concepcion.
No. Sorry. I'm sorry. Michael Concepcion. S. John McGregor, who has lots of upvotes, but the algorithm missed as usual. All right. S. John McGregor asks, Dear docs, is there any logic to the notion that training heavier within reason during a cut could lead to increased muscle retention in smaller muscle groups with faster recovery times? No. Surely the body would be less likely to cut muscle from areas experiencing greater acute stress. Sure, but it's by no means clear that heavier accomplishes that better than lighter and higher volume.
And the greater acute stress also might mean that you can't train as much during a cut because you exceed your MRV right away.
Yep. Would the faster twitch fibers not also be sensitized at the end of the last meso of accumulation after focusing more on burn techniques than deloading? Nope, they would be sensitized less. They actually get desensitized from that kind of training. Asking for a friend. Obviously, I would never willingly open myself up to criticism.
My man.
S. John McGregor, you're the fucking man. No, great question. And, honest to God, people have been saying you got to train lighter when you're cutting. Other people have been saying you got to train heavier when you're cutting. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the people who say you got to train really heavy when you're cutting are like people who are quote unquote evidence-based and not jacked even for naturals, mostly.
Ooh, shots fired.
Yeah. And then the people who say that you should train lighter when cutting are generally on average more like they're taking a shitload of steroids, and the anti-estrogens make them so dry that they get hurt if they go heavy. Generally speaking, you train the same way when you're cutting as when you're massing. But I will say that the scales for the average person tip a little bit more into the slightly higher reps when you're cutting because it reduces injury risk. It can allow you to add reps instead of adding load as a progression method, which is better attuned to the slower isoform expression of the fiber types when you're chronically high fatigued and low calorie. So I would actually say going a little on the higher rep side is a bit better when cutting. You can go a little bit heavier during massing. If you're at the end of the day, SFR. If you're getting great SFRs, that's the answer. We've experienced and pretty decent theoretical grounds for slightly worse SFRs for really heavy movements when cutting, slightly higher ones for those movements when massing if they're still unheavy. Remember, this was a really cool thing that Eric Helms said. He said this a bunch, but sorry, I can't name a specific podcast or something, but I think it was one of our discussions even. He was like, I used to think all kinds of stuff that was just like sort of what the evidence-based guys said. But then we as a community and myself as a person realized that some of the stuff we were saying maybe actually isn't true. And he's like, it took me a while to come around to the idea that like training heavy during a cut to save muscle just doesn't seem to at least make positive sense. It's not that it makes negative sense and is actively wrong. It's not clear to me that that's a good idea. Another debate was, should you try to hang on to intensity or hang on to volume when you're cutting? And I think that's what Eric was answering. He was like, I think volume won that one. Like, if you start doing like 1 to 2 sets and going ultra heavy, you just lose a shitload of muscle and you're not training enough. And you can't go heavy anyway because you're so fucking weak. So it's like kind of like
it's exactly, you can't do it.
It's using a really shitty gun for which you don't even have bullets anymore. So I think volume on that one, multiple sets. The question is clearly set equated. And I would say slightly lighter is usually a better bet for, if nothing else, injury, and if nothing else, ego. You experience a decrease more in strength than you do in repetition ability when you're cutting. So at least that is something that can keep you going psychologically, because we know physiologically they're roughly equivalent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you went there. I was going to kind of touch on that too. Like just broad strokes, like as Mike said, you train the same on both, but if you're going to bias in one direction on cutting, I usually would, and this is just a practical recommendation. It's not like a hard line, like this is what the literature says. It's just in my experience, if you're cutting, you bias a little bit towards the lighter end, not a lot of it, just a little bit. And when you're massing, you bias a little bit towards the heavier end. You play to the strength of the situation. When you're cutting, you're fatigued. You're not going to be able to use as much intensity. And fucking hypertrophy training, you have a huge spectrum of intensity in which you can hypertrophy the muscle. So why make it unnecessarily difficult? When you're massing, your recovery ability goes through the roof because of all that you're eating. So you can actually tolerate doing those heavier loads, and they might be marginally more stimulative per repetition. So it's a good time to think about going a little bit heavier. So just broad strokes, cutting, maybe bias a little lighter, massing, maybe bias a little bit heavier.
One last question.
All right.
Vasil. The VAS should do it.
Vasil. Oh, God. What have I done? There he is. Oh, he's at the bottom. How did he get so low?
Isn't that crazy? And he has 5 upvotes. What's with this algorithm?
Lisa Simpson liberal.
That says yikes.
Yikes.
Anyway.
I guess she's outraged about something.
Yeah, I think we spoke about Ayn Rand and then probably rustled for Jimmy's. So this is kind of related. Vasil Relief says, sorry if it's too much with the personal questions, but I got to at least try after hearing that tremendous Ayn Rand bit over the months. And I don't even remember much of what I said, probably for the best.
You went on a pretty good one.
Yeah, that's funny because a few people got ultra triggered. It's hilarious. Over the months and hundreds of non-RP, quote unquote, original videos, like podcasts and associated content consumed, I've grown to believe that social, mental, philosophical, and psychological models that comprise the underpinnings of what Mike Israetel, as we know him, are valuable for each and every person not familiar with them. Thanks, Vasil. That's a help stretch. I work out of a basement, Vasil. I'm hardly a person to look up to. But in any case, could you please share sports science stuff aside? I'm reading my screen wrong. There we go. What makes you, you? I'm talking stuff like the books from Thomas Sowell, Steven Pinker, and Ayn Rand. We need more of that shit to balance out with the sports science knowledge. So 2 things. One, I probably can't give you a whole lot of that shit, and I'll tell you why. At RP, we run an inclusive for-profit business, and if we share incredibly iconoclastic political views, then we get less business and we make less money, and that's bad, mostly because we just don't get to help as many people that otherwise would be customers that would get great results, and they just avoid the fuck out of us because they don't like our politics, which, politics is a personal thing. But I will say, so, I don't, what makes me is largely genetics, but I will say, I think I can speak for myself and James, correct me if I'm wrong on what I'm about to splurge on. I think what unites a lot of the folks at RP, and myself and James more specifically, is that we're really, really huge fans. By the way, this applies to Charlie and Jared as well, of critical thinking. We are huge fans of the idea that the truth about the world is something that's probably out there in the world, and that you can have a mental model that reflects it incrementally better or worse. And you should probably invest a considerable amount of time and effort into making sure that you are trying your best to get as close to the truth as possible in whatever endeavor you choose. And it's so easy to get carried away in myth and desire and virtue and all these other things, and you end up missing the reality of what's going on. And critical thinking taken to that extreme of no ideas are beyond criticism, no ideas are beyond accepting, even if they are pretty nasty implications, even if you can't talk about them. A huge fraction of the political beliefs James and I have, we will never discuss on the current version of the internet because they're so goddamn cancelable. You have no idea. The thing is, huge fraction of Americans, people all over the world are in that camp as well. It's just a lot of shit you can't talk about. We live in an interesting era. I have coined the term neo-Victorianism, where there's all sorts of ideas you can have, and if you share publicly, you get essentially like the modern analog of how dare you. It's like if you were a scallywag poor person with rags and mud and you walked into a Victorian ballroom, oh heavens, well, you are not a good person. People just color that shit with their own ideas about what's true, and they layer it in. So I think it's best for folks to try to get at what they really think is the objective truth and use the tools of critical thinking. Steven Pinker just published another fucking killer book, which I'm making my way through, called Rationality. Yeah. Rationality, bro. It's out. Get it. It's fucking cool. Sweet. Get it in written form, not an audiobook. It's just too goddamn hard to read an audiobook and really like perseverate over the examples.
I won't read it. I don't read.
Then get it in audio. It's the second best. It's better than nothing, right? Because he has some examples to think about, and you'd have to pause it. I'd really like to see it on a sheet of paper. But in any case, Steven Pinker is great for that sort of thing. We could probably. I'll give you guys another. This is the last thing I'll say about this matter. My view of the world, and probably James's, can be best summed up with an article that you can Google. Called Critical Thinking, What Is It Good For? In Fact, What Is It? By Howard Gabinesh. It is the single best article I have ever seen written on the entire internet. You will read it, and if it upsets you, good, because that probably means you're wrong about some shit. If you really like it, good. Invest into becoming more like what the article says. And it's the ultimate critical thinking article. It is a godsend. I don't know. I can't even Google the guy anymore. I have no idea where he is. I want to go to his house and give him flowers or some shit or like a lot of money and be like, God damn it, you should be in charge. But it's just a phenomenal article telling you about critical thinking is composed of skills, worldviews, and values. As a critical thinker, you can be very skilled at being mentally very smart, but your worldview about how things work might be inaccurate, or your values of what really is important to you and how should you act in situations in which there's mystery could be off. And, you see a lot of real smart people have wacky fucking ideas when their worldviews and values are off. Or you see people with legal worldviews and values, they just don't know how to critically think. They don't know a lot of logical fallacies. They'll commit them all the time. Look, we all commit fallacies every now and again. But if you have a value of saying to yourself, I'm the kind of person that if someone points out to me in good faith, I'm committing logical fallacy, I'm going to try to change that shit. I want to really know how things are. Because once we know how things really are, then we can fucking talk about what to do about them. And that's ultimately, if you're not on that bandwagon, respect, no worries, but you're probably going to not understand a whole lot of what's going on in life. And as technological progress speeds up here in the next 10 to 20 years, you're really not going to understand what the fuck is going on. And you'll probably vote for candidates that'll make us progressively not as well off as we could have been. That's my spiel. James, did I put you in a camp you don't want to be in, or what?
Oh, no, not at all. And I tend to be in the same conundrum that Mike is, where I have plenty of views and I would love to share them. And I think people would find them valuable. That sounds egotistical, but whatever. But at the same time, I have put I haven't even put any of my views out there. Like literally, I got roasted more than a few times for just posting on Instagram saying like, I read this book. And people are like, my God, you fucking Nazi. And so that's one of many reasons why I don't do that kind of stuff anymore, just because it just brings so much like negative tension. And the thing is, it's unclear to me how much of that is people who are truly outraged versus people who just want to be outraged versus people who are just Russian provocateurs versus bots versus like Chinese provocateurs. Like,
yes, Russia's done. They're like, fuck it, we'll let China keep doing this shit.
It's so crazy. So Mike and I obviously share a lot of our interests in books and movies and intellectual thinkers. If you really give a shit what I think, if you go to my Instagram and my bio, I have a link to things that I find very influential in the way that I think on there. So there's a big list of books and movies and comic books and anime and all sorts of stuff. So I can't really share it without risking RP getting canceled. Wah, wah.
For sure.
So
is the times we live in.
Yeah, but hopefully my sports science views keeps us rolling for now, and I don't say anything stupid, which, I mean, who knows at this point. One of the things that Mike probably knows me best for is saying the wrong thing at the right time.
We have a name for it. It's called Jamesing yourself.
Yeah, I just was notorious in our grad school for just like talking shit about people when they're standing right behind me, just like classic James move.
Oh, I loved every minute of it.
All right, well, I think we're going to wrap this one up for this week. So let's see. There's a lot of like classified RP documents right now, so I'm not really sure how much I can talk about. There are several projects underway. Man, I don't think I can talk about any of them, but definitely interesting things coming. There's a major project underway that I can't really talk about, but like I said before, it's preventing one of our books from being released. So you can imagine that's probably pretty important. Dr. Mike, you got anything going on that you can disclose?
No, but things are in the pipeline. Bunch of great videos. So folks, go watch the video this week about, just came out recently, Loose Skin and stretch marks and what to do about that with dieting, because that's a big deal. People ask about it a lot. It's a pretty popular video. So go boost the algorithm, God damn it. Lamborghinis don't buy themselves.
I thought you were going to say, check out the video on loose in the caboose.
Also do that. Just Google that. I don't know.
All right. I think that's it for this week, folks. Thanks for all the upvotes. We had a whole lot, like 70 on some of the questions. That was really awesome. So again, for those of you who are kind of new tuning into Dr. Mike and my nonsense, always just scan the previous week's Q&A and then just see if there's any questions that you really liked or you thought were really interesting. And if you find those, give them an upvote. And then if there's any that if there's any questions that are kind of unresolved or you have questions that didn't come up, go ahead and pop them in, and hopefully people will give you that same courtesy and upvote your questions, and we'll get to them.
Boom. Peace, homies.
That's it. See you guys next time.